Bear with us just a moment, folks. I'm having an issue getting the radio going, radio player, so we can stream through the radio over here. That is very, very important to this show. And there we go, folks. Now let's get this party started. Please rise for the national anthem.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Things are better left unknown, and I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever
We've got a lot of information to go over tonight, folks. Stay tuned. Ready for a wild ride.
She's a sneaky hider, hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner, is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner, is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.
Ripon Rabbit Hole is a community-driven radio. At times the community comments may reveal prejudices and other beliefs that we or our sponsors do not condone. Views or opinions expressed by the community, callers, or guests, are those of the individual speaking and do not represent the views or opinions of this site. Ripon Common Sense content is intended for mature audiences only. Enjoy.
Coming to you from a secret cave, hidden deep within the wilderness. This is the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and we are broadcasting live from a secret cave hidden deep within the wilderness of Tennessee. That's right. We're ripping through the electromagnetic soup. We're tearing through the atmosphere, and we're tunneling away into your radio like a quantum particle. This is the Dark Wolf's Den radio show for Thursday, August the 4th, 2022. So whether you're on the edge of a reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you, folks. And tonight is definitely worth the wait. Ladies and gentlemen, we are doing the abolition of inheritance, the third plank of the Communist Manifesto. We've covered 1 and 2 so far, and this one ties right in with the previous 2 that we have covered, so I hope you've been paying attention. All that and more coming up here in just a moment, but first, let's go ahead and see who all we have out here in our YouTube chat rooms, both on the Ripon Rabbit Hole as well as the Dark Wolf's Den radio show. How we doing out here tonight, folks? I see Chris Spivey hanging out over in the Dark Wolf's Den show chat. Glad to see you, my friend. Always a pleasure. Chris says, stop it, that tickles. He said, still saluting, even though he is laying down and relaxing, always giving respect to our incredible flag. Absolutely, sir. He said, if it wasn't for inheritance, I would be eating government cheese, living in a van down by the river. Loved some Chris Farley back in the day. Chris was awesome, right, guys? Shout out to everybody listening also on the radio that isn't chatting. Come on over to the Dark Wolf's Den Show or the Ripon Rabbit Hole YouTube. We would love to have you over here hanging out with us, like Sandy B on the Ripon Rabbit Hole, checking in with the how. That's right, Sandy. Thumbs up in love to you too, love. I don't know who everybody is, but if you want to join us and make sure that you hear the entire show, do make sure that you log on to the riponrabbithole.com. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link in both the chat rooms now. Log on there, and if you don't follow that link, then just log on to the page, click the top left-hand corner where the thumbnail for tonight's show is, and it'll take you right into the area where the chat room is available, as we will be cutting from the show about 45 minutes into the show, and the rest will be exclusively on the radio, folks, so you do not want to miss that. That's where the juicy stuff is. That is where the best part of the show, in my opinion, really is, when we can exercise our freedom of speech here and talk openly, unlike this platform that we are currently multicasting on, if you guys know what I mean. FYNT, that's right. And whether you are listening on YouTube or around the world on Ripon Common Sense Radio Network at the riponrabbithole.com, or even on the replays on BitChute or Rumble, we appreciate having every last one of you guys along for the ride. That's right, and a wild ride it will be, and we're going to take it here in just a moment. But first, we have 2 more fun little segments to do, the first of which we call Today in History. On this day in 1862, the U.S. government officially collects its first income tax. That's right, folks. And it's interesting, we literally just discussed the income tax and the Marxist view on income tax, as well as the 16th Amendment last night. So interesting that it should line up this fact of the day specifically for this weekend. It'd be even cooler if I told you guys I planned it out, but I didn't, right? One of those many synchronicities we hit here at the Dark Wolf Den Show, and that happened on this day in 1862. That is today's segment of Today in History.
Say what?
Our quote of the day today, folks, comes from the great demander and thief, the American resident himself, Joe Biden. He says, and I quote,
"Time for America to back up on its feet and once again fight for the proposition that we hold these truths to be self-evident." Sounds corny. Not a joke. Think about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing. You know how we talk about it. Are we the people?
So close, Joe. Once again, you missed it by that much. Anyways, folks, that is today's segment of
Say what?
Poor Joe. Doesn't look like he inherited the long end of the smart stick, right? He might have got the short end of that one. But speaking of inheritance, that is what we were talking about tonight, is inheritance and the abolition thereof according to the third plank of communism, which is kind of scary, especially when we get to the second half and see if we are very close to this occurring or not. I promise you, folks, it's a lot closer than we think we are. But before we get into that, I would like to take a moment to explain why I'm doing this series, in case you have missed it along the way. The reason and the point of this series is to gain the knowledge and give you guys the knowledge of the Communist Manifesto so that we can see things as they come down the pipeline, or what has already been initiated in this country to try to turn it communist. We know that this country has been infiltrated. We know who it's been infiltrated by. Now we need to understand how they work. Thus, we are going through the entire 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto and comparing it to that of America, and seeing if we are anywhere near communism or how close we have come so far. I personally think this is very, very important information to get out there to everyone. So please do me a favor, share this everywhere you can. We need people to know this information. But inheritance. So when your family member dies, you inherit the estate. That's the way it normally works. You pass it down generation to generation, and the next generation growing on the back of the previous one. That all sounds great. And in America, that's what we do, right? Sort of. We'll get to that in the second half. But the Communist Manifesto calls for the abolition of inheritance, and like Marx said, and we discussed this in the plank 1 of the series, all of the Communist Manifesto can be brought down to the abolition of private property. If there's no private property to pass down, there is no inheritance, folks. You don't own your property, you can't pass it to your children. You can't pass it to your loved ones, your family. That is what the communists believe is the truly socially just way of doing things. Marx said the abolishment of inheritance was essential to a collectivist society. In an 1889 pamphlet titled The Report of the Fourth Annual Congress of the International Working Men's Association, Karl Marx wrote that the abolition of inheritance would be part of a natural progression. Once private ownership of land and the means of production are discontinued and given into the hands of the state, there would no longer be any personal, private held wealth to pass down. Marx cautioned, though, that abolishing inheritance without a radical change in the socio-economic order would be a reactionary distraction. So it would not work if you did not get rid of the private property to begin with. Otherwise, it will just fail, because especially in this country, people will stand up really quick, as it did in the Saint Simonian view. See, Marx wasn't the first person to suggest getting rid of inheritance. 40 years before the publication of Marx's pamphlet, followers of French aristocrat Claude Henry de Saint-Simon, known as Saint Simonians, built upon Saint Simon's promotion of social interdependence and anti-individual selfishness by attacking inheritance. They believed this was a counterproductive practice in which children of the rich were given wealth unearned by merit or contribution to society. It was basically just given to them. They were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Although Saint Simon believed that ownership of private property was proper and necessary to create productivity, he did not believe property was imbued with natural dynastic rights. As we know here in America, we have our inalienable property rights. But in the Saint Simonians' view, that was not the case. And what would that look like, the abolition of inheritance? Well, on April 27th, 1918, the Soviet Union issued a decree abolishing inheritance, and I'm going to read that decree right now. It says, 1. Inheritance, whether by law or by will, is abolished. After the death of an owner, the property which belongs to him, whether movable or immovable, becomes the property of the government of the Russia Socialistic Soviet Federative Republic. It goes to the state, folks. Note, the discontinuance and transfer of rights of utilization of farmlands is determined by the rules provided in the fundamental law of the socialization of the land. Remember, socialism is communism. Number 2, until the issuance of a decree dealing with general social arrangements, relatives who are in need, those who do not possess a minimum maintenance, and who are incapable of work, such relatives being in a directly ascending or descending line, full or half brothers or sisters, spouse, the deceased receive support from the property left by the deceased. Note 1, no distinction is made between the relationship that arises within wedlock or outside thereof. Note 2, adopted relatives or children and their descendants are put on the same footing as relatives by descendant, whether as those adopted or who have not been. Section 3, if there is not enough property remaining to support a spouse and all surviving relatives as enumerated above, then the most needy of them must be provided for first. Social justice. Number 4, the amount of allowance to be given a spouse and surviving relatives from the property of the deceased is determined by the institution conducting the affairs of Social Security in the governments, and in Moscow and Petrograd by the municipal Soviet workers and peasants' deputies, in agreement with the person who have the right to receive the allowance. In case of dispute between them, it will be held by the local court according to usual proceedings. Cases of this sort under jurisdiction of Soviet workmen's and peasants' deputy and local courts are of the last place of residence of the deceased. And it goes on for quite a while. I guess I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it basically says that the state gets everything and you will be doled out a small allotment for what would have been your inheritance. And you're lucky to get that, apparently. It even goes on to break down how the money will be doled out. From the property of the deceased are paid first the expenses of the administration of the property. The relatives and spouse of the deceased receive their allowances before the creditors are paid. The creditors of the deceased, if their claims are recognized as proper, are satisfied from the property after the deductions indicated above. On condition, in case of the property is insufficient to cover all demands of the creditors, the general principle of the meeting of creditors be applied. So I'm assuming the state would cover that, right? If the property of the deceased does not exceed 10,000 rubles, or in particular consist of a farmhouse, domestic furniture, and needs for economic production by work in either the city or village, it comes under the immediate control of the spouse and relatives, enumerated in Article 2 of the present decree. The method of control and management of the property is arranged by arrangement between the spouse and relatives, in the case of disagreement, by the local tribunal. So again, the government decides who gets what and when you get it. That is the abolition of inheritance. You are no longer allowed to inherit things from your previous family. And this includes money, property, whatever the case may be. But of course, if you have no private property already, then it's already abolished, right? There is no property to hand down to your relatives. And again, I told you it builds upon the last two planks. So in America, we believe that we have the right to inheritance, and we believe that we have the right to private property. Now, we learned in the first episode that the government truly owns everything. And the reason for this is the central banks. You see, the government borrows money from the central bank, and it borrows it in such a way that it will always and always remain in debt. And it does this through the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor does it have reserves. The central bank is not really a bank, it's just a conglomerate of criminals. That's a whole nother discussion entirely. But upon owing this debt, the central bank owns every inch of land in this country until all debts are paid off with interest, which will never happen. So then you don't really own your property. You don't have private property. Anytime the central bank could say, here, your taxes on property have gone up to this point. Oh, you can't pay? Well, it's ours now. That's what was dangerous about the private property episode. Then we get into the taxes, of course, and the income taxes that we figured out was also communist in having a graduated income tax, and it's in our 16th Amendment, which in this host's opinion needs to be repealed. But the 16th Amendment was a lot more dangerous than we even realized it was, because it allowed them to do something else 3 years later, and we will discuss what that something is coming up in the second half of the show. And you do want to make sure, folks, that you are logged on to the riponrabbithole.com, RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. As partway through the second half of the show, we will be cutting the main YouTube feed and will only be available exclusively on the platform at riponrabbithole.com. You can go over there and click on the top left-hand banner. It should be the Dark Wolf's Den Show banner for tonight. This is going to take you to a special page with the radio player as well as the chat room we have set up just for you over there. It is a freedom-based chat room, as Ripon Rabbit Hole is the home of the Freedom Flame. That's right. So do make sure you come on over and join us, as we will be going dark on YouTube at about the 45-minute mark. And of course, in the second half, we are going to be discussing how close America is to having no inheritance. Are we there yet, folks? I don't think we're there quite yet. Then again, we might be a lot closer than you would originally have assumed, right? What do you guys think out here in the chat? Put a 1 if you think that we are absolutely there. There is no inheritance left in this country. Put a 2 if you think that we are really close but not quite there yet. Put a 3 if you think there is no worry when it comes to the abolition of inheritance. That will not ever be a problem in this country. Let's see what you guys have been talking about over here this whole time. How we doing over here in chat, guys? Looks like JoJo's waving in over here. Glad to see you. The JoJo's dropping links for the Ripon Rabbit Hole and the Backstage. Glad to see that, Joe. Sandy B throwing out the say what way back when. She ain't really said much. 2 says Chris. He believes we are pretty close to falling into this abolition. So does Tara Spivey. It's excellent to see you over here, Tara. Always a pleasure. Really glad to see you chatting here. Chris says earlier, keep in mind, Social Security goes back to the general fund if you die before retirement age or kids are above the age of 18. So Social Security, keep in mind, was also started by a socialist Democrat. That is a socialist aspect also in this country. My Life DIY says too, we are pretty close to having no inheritance, but not quite there yet. Sandy B says 1.5. No, not really. We still got inheritance, but maybe. It might be closer to 2. She's unsure. 1.5 over there. Not really good with these fractions, folks. But glad to see you, My Life DIY. Glad to see you finally checking in over here. I was getting a little worried. It was a little quiet in the chat. JoJo's also glad to see you once again checking in. It's scary stuff, folks. It truly is. It is really scary stuff that once the private property's gone, and like he said, it could, Marx himself said, it can all be brought down to the abolition of private property. You lose that, you lose everything. You lose your ability to work, to live, to have a life worth living. And that is really, really dangerous based on its face. But all of this is meant to destroy the capitalist society we have in this country. And we have to know what we're doing. We have to be aware at all times. We have to know our enemy. Know thy enemy as well as we know thyself. Would you guys not agree? And of course that music means we have to go ahead and take a network break right here, folks. So my name is Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. You're listening to the Dark Wolf's Den radio show, Freedom Flame series. The third plank of communism, abolition of inheritance, right here on Ripon, Common Sense Radio Network, the RiponRabbitHole.com, home of the Freedom Flame. We'll be right back with the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den show after these short messages. Stick around, don't touch that dial. That's right.
We gotta stoke the fires and run off the men in black. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, Jerry the Dark Wolf here. I just want to give you guys a quick update on this weekend's schedule and some interesting goings on that have occurred in the last couple days. Check this out. On tomorrow, Friday, August the 5th, 2022, there will be no Freedom Flame Friday discussion series this week. That's right, folks. Instead, there will be a very special Backstage Lounge event where we will be having live exclusive coverage of the Trump speech in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That's right. So do make sure that you are signed up over at the RiponRabbitHole.com. RiponRabbitHole.com. Also, while you're over there, you're going to find the rest of the schedule as we posted through the weekend, as this will be a very wild card weekend. Stay tuned for details. Now, for those that don't know, the last GOP governor candidates debate or town hall occurred just a couple days ago in Wisconsin, and we were going to make that our featured story over at the RiponRabbitHole.com. However, when we went to embed it in the page, we found out that TMJ4 News does not allow us to embed their article. I wonder why that could be. Perhaps, I'm just theorizing, guys, it might be the fact that the last time we embedded their article, we got more hits on our site than they got on their original YouTube channel. That might have something to do with it. I don't know. Just speculation, you know. Anyway, guys, we have went ahead and posted the actual soundbite down the rabbit hole over at the RiponRabbitHole.com. Another feature you get when you sign up for the Backstage Pass. Down the rabbit hole, our privatized social media section. So if you're interested in those debates, do go over and please check that out, folks. And with that said, do make sure that you stay tuned always to the riponrabbithole.com for further details of everything coming up on our platform, RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. We now return you to the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den radio show. Communist plank number 3, abolition of inheritance, only exclusively on Ripon Common Sense Radio Network, the riponrabbithole.com, home of the Freedom Flame.
If you were meant to be controlled, you would have come with a remote, but you didn't. And that's why you listen to the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and welcome back to the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den radio show for Thursday, August the 4th, 2022. So whether you're on the edge of a reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Folks, tonight, if you're just joining in, we have covered a number of aspects of the abolition of inheritance, the third plank of communism as communists see it, to put everybody on a level playing ground. And it also goes into the second plank of communism that we discussed last night, the graduated income tax. How does it play into that? Because the 16th Amendment actually allowed for a couple interesting things. One thing that it did was allow Congress 3 years later to impose the inheritance tax, also known as the death tax, folks. That's right, you are taxed for dying. Your inheritance is taxed if your loved one dies. Now, is this right or wrong, or how close is this to the full abolition of inheritance? That is a really good question. The Supreme Court said Congress had no ability to make new taxes. However, there it stands, and it stands to this day. And I'd like to read a bit of an article to you guys from Libertad y Progreso. It is actually in English, so here we go. As we know, the Communist Manifesto, written by Marx and Engels in 1848, constitutes the central document of the totalitarian religion of our time. It details 10 points to sabotage and exterminate the capitalist system, and that's exactly what they want to do, is exterminate the capitalist system, America being a standing point of that system. In its third point, it advises eliminating inheritance, and this goes back again to the first plank of communism and destruction of the capitalist system, claiming, quote, the communists can undoubtedly summarize their entire theory in this single expression: abolition of private property. We know that very well. We've heard that from Marx a couple times already. It goes on to say, it has been argued that the establishment of the inheritance tax tends to equalize everyone at the start of the race for life, attenuating the advantages of birth. Marxists claim that this is fair because it allows each one to develop their potential without the support of their ancestors or benefits of their efforts. They haven't claimed or haven't earned it, according to Marxists. The celebrated Oxford professor Anthony de Saget, and probably the most prolific and creative author in the tradition in liberal thought, shows that the metaphor of a race for life is self-destructive. This is so because those who arrive first in the contest will see their effort destroyed, since their descendants will be leveled in the next race and not receive anything from the effort of the progenitor, precisely due to the horizontal guillotine implied by the inheritance tax. This exasperates in its whole or in part the case that will cover the whole or negative effect will cover just one part. So it got a little wordy there at the end. But to put it in short, to put an inheritance tax into place is something that Marx actually advocated for as a way to take the property and private property of those that have, right, to give it back to the social equivalency, right? You don't get to own more than you are allowed by the state or the government in this case. Now, how close in America are we to having a inheritance tax? Does anybody know? It looks like we crossed the line on that, folks, a long time ago in 1913 when the act of the 16th Amendment was put into place. It was probably one of the worst things that happened to this country. And the reason goes back to the fact that the central banks were put into control of this country, believe it or not, through the Federal Reserve, which was created again by the 16th Amendment. And I'm not sure if it's by the 16th Amendment. I might have misspoken there. It was created at the same time. I do know that. But it also allowed taxes to be levied for other things, like death. This is 3 years after the 16th Amendment was put into place. The death tax was excised upon America. If you die, there is a tax on your estate. Now, your estate is everything that you have, your property, from your computer to your land to your house to whatever you may have. That is considered your estate. The feds then step in and tax that estate. Now, everything there has been taxed a number of times in payment, right? When you pay for a house, don't you pay the taxes? When you pay your property taxes on that house, don't you pay your taxes? Isn't that taxation of property right there? We discussed that in plank 1. So why is it taxed again as an inheritance? How about if it was taxed and then the tax was just, as we discussed in the private property episode, taken so high that you can't pay it? What happens then? I'll tell you what happens. The state comes in and takes it. Or the bank. Call it what you will. It's not yours anymore. And the inheritance works the same way. The state will come in and take what it wants, and it will sell off the difference. And if there's anything left, you might get the scraps. Maybe. That's exactly how it works in this country, ladies and gentlemen. Do you believe that? Scary, isn't it? The former president that I'm sure many of us tend to like very much actually stated that it is an unfair tax, and I would agree it is unfair to tax somebody for death. That's almost like taxing somebody to breathe, which they are working on, make no mistake. But it is absolutely and incredibly unfair to tax especially the next of kin for the estate that exist, or in essence you're buying off the state's a portion of that estate, right? Again, going to show the government owns everything through the Federal Reserve because they get loans from the central bank. And that loan, until paid off, because it'll never be paid off because it's always gotten with interest that they can't pay off. Once paid off, then the land will be America's again, but it's not. It'll never be paid off, folks. That's why your private property is not really your private property. That's why taxes can be levied upon you that you don't vote for. This is why the inheritance tax has also been levied upon you so bureaucrats can get their greedy hands on your stuff and your money one more time. How many times are you going to tax the same thing? We pay income tax, then we pay tax when we buy stuff, then we pay tax when we sell that stuff, then we pay taxes all the way around. How many times are we going to be taxed on the same thing? It's over taxation. Whether you argue that taxation is theft or not, how much taxes are you willing to give? Inflation, there's another hidden tax, right? We won't even get into that one. That's way off topic. But in America, folks, this is yet another plague of communism that we can check off the list as being in place in America. How disturbing is that, folks? Are you scared yet? You should be. You should be very scared that this country is so close to socialism and communism in this state of affairs that we're in. That's why it's so important that we have this knowledge, that we know what to look for, that we understand what is going on all around us. It allows us to make common sense decisions, informed decisions, that in the end will help us survive in this crazy time, right? Because hopefully when we know what's around us, we can save our republic and turn it back to the republic that it was meant to be when our forefathers wrote the original documents. And with that said, folks, I want to remind everybody that we are about to cut off the YouTube feed in less than 2.5 minutes. So make sure you are logged on over at the riponrabbithole.com, RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. Over there, you're going to click on the left-hand corner of the screen. At the top, it's going to have the show... what's the word I'm looking for? Thumbnail. Sorry. Had a little moment there in the brain. You're going to click on the show thumbnail. It's going to take you to an all-new page. On this page, you're going to have a chat box, and you're going to be able to listen along to the rest of the show on the radio exclusively. So do make sure that you are over signed in on the riponrabbithole.com. If you do not sign in, you can still chat. You will merely come up as anonymous with a random number behind you. But we still would like to have you over there, folks, because it is a freedom of speech chat. And we are, of course, at the Ripon Rabbit Hole, are all about our rights and freedom. So unlike the syndication that we do, or I should say the multicasting that we do over on the platform YouTube, of course, we will be cutting that multicast platform at about 1 minute now, and we will not be available. So again, if you are listening, do make sure that you are logged on to the riponrabbithole.com. I really hope to see you guys over there and be able to chat with you over there, as the chat rooms over here, they will still be available, but we will not have any audio coming out anymore. I will put a screen up explaining to come over to the Ripon Rabbit Hole, and there should be right now, as a matter of fact, links in the chat from the moderators over to the page on the Ripon Rabbit Hole to make it even easier if you don't have the ability to jump around or grab an extra browser. Just pull up the chat here on YouTube, and the link is available in the chat. And we will be cutting that feed here again in less than 15 seconds, folks. So thank you for listening on YouTube. If you want to make sure you catch all our shows, catch us over at the riponrabbithole.com. And we will be cutting this feed in 3, 2, 1 now.